her tribe buried up to her neck in the sand. Cherokee woman closed her eyes to die until the Cherokee woman Ahioka lived in a quiet village tucked away between dense forests and a wide, calm river. The trees were tall and strong, their leaves whispering in the wind like voices from the past. Sunlight spilled through the branches, casting patterns on the soft earth below. In this village, life had always followed a steady rhythm. People rose with the sun to tend their crops, gathered herbs from the forest, and told stories of their ancestors around small fires in the evening. Ahioka had grown up learning these stories, and she loved every word of them. From a young age, Ahioka had been different from other children. She was thoughtful, quiet, and often found herself wandering along the riverbank, feeling the cool water slip between her fingers, watching the birds skim across the surface. She listened to the forest with careful attention, as if it were speaking directly to her. The elders of the village had noticed her connection to nature and said she had a gentle spirit, one that could see beyond what others could. They often entrusted her with small tasks that required patience and care, like gathering rare herbs for medicine or helping the children learn the old songs. Despite her calm and gentle nature, life in the village was not always easy. The Cherokee people had lived for generations in these lands, but tensions were growing. Neighboring tribes sometimes came close, hunting near the same rivers or setting traps in the forest. Occasionally disagreements arose, and the elders had to make hard decisions to protect their people. Fear and worry were never far from anyone's mind. Ahioka felt it too, though she tried not to show it. Still, the stories she heard around the fire at night often made her restless. Some spoke of spirits, others of punishments for those who had angered the gods or broken the tribe's rules. One morning, Ahioka awoke to the soft chirping of birds and the smell of wet earth after a night of rain. She had slept in a small hut with her mother, who had taught her to weave baskets and make simple medicines from plants. Today, however, there was a tension in the air. Villagers spoke in hushed voices, glancing nervously toward the center of the village. Curious and uneasy, Ahioka walked carefully between the huts. She saw small groups of people gathered, whispering and pointing. The elders, who usually moved with quiet authority, were speaking firmly, with worried expressions. Ahioka didn't understand what was happening at first. Then she heard the whispers that made her heart pound. Something terrible had happened, they said, something that needed an explanation. The crops had not grown well this season. Some animals had gone missing. A series of small accidents had occurred in the village. Broken tools, trips in the river, minor injuries. People whispered that someone must be responsible, someone who had brought misfortune. And somehow the eyes of the villagers had turned toward Ahioka. She felt her stomach tighten. She had always tried to help the village, always followed the rules, always respected the elders. How could they think she was responsible for these misfortunes? The elders approached her hut and asked her to come with them. Her mother's hand trembled as she held Ahioka's arm. "It is not your fault, child," her mother whispered, her voice soft but full of worry. But the fear in her mother's eyes told Ahioka that this was serious. As she walked toward the center of the village, she noticed the children she had taught staring at her with wide eyes. Even they seemed unsure, as if they sensed something dark and heavy in the air. The elders had gathered near the large fire pit, where the village held important ceremonies. Today, however, there was no music, no singing, only silence, broken occasionally by murmurs of worry. Ahioka felt herself shaking, but she tried to stand tall. She had always respected the elders, and she believed in the traditions of her people. Even when they were frightening, one elder, an older man with silver hair and deep lines etched into his face, stepped forward. He spoke with a calm but serious voice, explaining that the village had suffered misfortune and that it was necessary to determine the cause. Ahioka listened carefully. She tried to speak, to explain that she had done nothing wrong, but the words caught in her throat. She realized that no matter what she said, the elder's decision might already be made. Fear began to fill her chest like a heavy stone. She thought of her mother, her friends, and the children she had taught. She wondered if she would ever see the river again, the trees, or the small animals she loved so much. Her mind raced, trying to understand what had led to this moment. Had she done something unknowingly? Had the spirits really been upset with her? The questions twisted inside her, but no answers came. The elders spoke again, this time in a low, serious tone that made Ahyoka's heart sink. She listened as they described a ritual meant to appease the spirits, a ritual that had been passed down for generations. It was meant to restore balance to the village and ensure that misfortune would not continue. Ahyoka understood what they were saying, though fear made her stomach twist. The ritual was dangerous. She had heard stories of it, but she never imagined it could happen to her. As the villagers began to prepare the riverbank for the ritual, Ahyoka's mind wandered back to simpler times. She remembered sitting by the fire with her mother, listening to stories of brave women and wise elders. She remembered the first time she had seen a deer in the forest, and how it had looked straight into her eyes, as if recognizing her spirit. She thought of her friends, of the laughter they had shared while weaving baskets, and of the soft wind on her face during quiet walks by the river. These memories brought a strange mix of sadness and comfort. She realized that no matter what happened next, these moments were hers forever. When they led her toward the riverbank, Ahyoka noticed the sand was soft but cool beneath her feet. She could see the water shimmering in the sunlight, reflecting the sky above. The villagers were quiet, their faces serious and tense. Some looked worried, others determined. Ahyoka felt the weight of the entire village pressing down on her, and a deep sense of helplessness began to grow. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to calm the storm of fear and uncertainty inside her, but it was difficult. Standing there, Ahyoka closed her eyes for a moment and whispered a silent prayer to the spirits she had always respected. She prayed not just for herself, but for her family, her friends, and her village. She prayed for strength, for guidance, and for protection. As the elders began the ritual, she felt the first grains of sand pressed against her body. She tried to stay calm, focusing on the gentle sounds of the river, the rustling of the trees, and the birds singing high above. These sounds reminded her that life continued, even in moments of fear and uncertainty. The ritual continued slowly, deliberately. Ahyoka felt herself sinking slightly into the sand, each movement controlled by the hands of the elders. Her body was heavy, and her heart pounded, but she refused to cry out. She had been taught to endure, to respect the wisdom of her elders, and to face life's challenges with courage. Still, she could not stop the tremble that ran through her body, the cold shiver that ran down her spine as the sun beat down on her face. For a moment, everything seemed still. The river flowed quietly beside her, and the wind whispered through the trees. Ahyoka opened her eyes and looked around. She saw the faces of her people, some full of worry, some full of resolve. She realized that this was not just about her. It was about the traditions, the beliefs, and the survival of her entire village. She understood the weight of what was happening, and though fear still gripped her, she felt a strange clarity. She would face this moment fully, with her heart open and her spirit strong. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the ritual continued. Ahyoka felt the warm grains of sand settle around her neck, holding her in place. She thought of the stories she had heard as a child, stories of brave women and wise leaders who had faced impossible challenges and survived. She reminded herself that she too was part of these stories, part of a living tradition that valued courage, patience, and the strength to endure. Though fear and uncertainty filled her heart, Ahyoka also felt a quiet determination growing within her. She would not give in to despair. She would honor the traditions of her people while holding on to her own spirit. And as the ritual continued, she began to realize that this moment, terrifying as it was, might also teach her something important. About herself, about courage, and about the fragile but unbreakable strength of the human heart. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a warm golden light across the village, yet Ahyoka hardly noticed it. Her body was pressed into the soft sand which held her firmly, leaving only her head free. The grains were warm and rough against her skin, and the longer she stayed still, the more she could feel every small shift and crackle beneath her. Around her, the villagers were silent. standing at a careful distance, their faces a mixture of fear, determination, and doubt. Some avoided her eyes, while others watched her as though she were a fragile bird in a storm. Ahyoka's heart raced. She had never felt so helpless. The forest she loved so much, the river she had walked along countless times, all felt far away, as though they existed in a different life. She had always believed in the traditions of her people, but now, as the ritual continued, she wondered if they were fair. She wondered if the elders truly understood the consequences of their actions. The sand pressed around her shoulders, and every small movement made her feel more trapped. She thought of the stories she had heard as a child, of women who had faced impossible challenges, and she clung to them in her mind like lifelines. The elders moved slowly around her, their hands steady and deliberate as they prepared the ritual. Each motion was precise, practiced over generations, yet Ahyoka could not shake the fear growing inside her. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves of the tall trees, and for a brief moment it seemed as if the forest itself was watching. Birds flew overhead, their calls piercing the tense silence. Ahyoka tried to focus on these small signs of life, reminding herself that the world continued beyond this moment of fear. Still, each passing minute made her feel smaller, more fragile, and closer to despair. Time stretched endlessly. Ahyoka's breathing grew uneven, her chest rising and falling with the effort to stay calm. She tried to think of happy memories, the time she had walked through the forest with friends, the laughter of children echoing in the village, the soft voice of her mother as she taught her to weave baskets and tend the small garden. These memories brought her comfort, but they also made the fear sharper. She did not want these memories to be the last she ever experienced. She wanted to live, to continue seeing the forest, the river, and her people. Around her, the villagers began to shift. Some murmured softly to each other, their voices low but anxious. A few glanced at Ahyoka with what seemed like pity, while others looked determined, as though convinced that the ritual must be carried out for the good of the village. She noticed the younger men and women standing close to the edges of the crowd, unsure, their eyes wide with uncertainty. Even the children, who had often followed her like a teacher and guide, now watched from a distance, their small hands clutching at each other as they whispered questions they did not dare to speak aloud.
Ahyoka tried to steady her thoughts.
She focused on the sounds around her, the soft rush of the river, the distant calls of birds, the gentle swaying of branches overhead. She tried to imagine herself walking through the forest, feeling the soft earth under her feet, listening to the wind in the leaves. She closed her eyes for a moment, and in her mind, she was free. She could feel the cool water on her hands, smell the wildflowers growing along the riverbank, and hear the laughter of friends echoing in the quiet. These thoughts gave her strength, a small spark of courage in the midst of fear. Yet the reality of the ritual kept pressing down on her. The sand held her tightly, and she realized just how dependent she was on the actions of others. Every movement of the elders, every glance from the villagers, mattered. She could feel their judgment in every eye that turned toward her. Every whispered word carried on the wind. The pressure of their attention was almost physical, heavy and unyielding, and it made her feel both exposed and vulnerable. She had never felt so alone, despite being surrounded by her own people. Hours seemed to pass. The sun shifted slowly across the sky, and the warmth of its rays made the sand beneath her almost unbearable. Her muscles ached from remaining still, and every small movement sent grains of sand into her hair and eyes. Ahyoka tried not to move, to keep herself steady, but the discomfort gnawed at her resolve. Her mind wandered to the river once more, imagining the cool water against her skin, the gentle flow around her hands. It was a small comfort, a reminder that life continued even when fear pressed heavily upon her. The villagers' reactions began to change as the ritual progressed. Some grew restless, shifting from foot to foot, whispering anxiously to one another. Others seemed more resolved, their faces set with determination, as if the ritual were necessary for the safety and balance of the village. Ahyoka could see the conflict in their eyes, the uncertainty, the fear, and the hope that somehow this ritual would make things right. She realized that she was not only facing her own fear, but also the weight of the village's expectations, the traditions, that had guided them for generations. As the day went on, Ayoka began to notice small details she had not before. The way the sunlight caught on the river, creating sparkling patterns on the surface. The way the trees seemed to sway in rhythm with the wind, almost as if they were alive and watching. She heard the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig, reminders that the world outside this moment of fear still existed. These small signs of life reminded her that she was part of a larger world, that her life mattered beyond this ritual and that she had a chance to survive. Despite these reminders, fear remained a constant presence. Ahioka's thoughts drifted to what might happen if she did not survive the ritual. She thought of her mother, her friends, the children she had taught, and the quiet walks she had taken along the riverbank. The thought of leaving them behind filled her with sadness and longing. She realized that she wanted to live not just for herself, but for all those who cared for her, for the people who had shared their lives with her. This thought gave her a flicker of hope, a determination to endure whatever was to come. The elders moved closer, their faces serious, their hands steady as they continued the ritual. Ayoka felt the pressure of the sand pressing more firmly against her shoulders, a reminder of how trapped she was. She took a deep breath, focusing on the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She reminded herself that she had faced challenges before, that she had walked through the forest alone, that she had learned to survive in the quiet moments of life. These memories strengthened her resolve, giving her the courage to face the unknown. The wind picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of the forest, the river, and the distant hills. Ahioka breathed deeply, letting the familiar smells ground her. She focused on the patterns of light and shadow created by the sun filtering through the leaves. She listened to the birds, the rustle of branches, and the soft murmur of villagers moving around her. Each sound, each sensation reminded her that she was alive, that she was part of this world, and that she still had a chance to survive. As the day wore on, Ahioka began to feel a strange mix of fear and clarity. The fear was sharp and immediate, pressing against her with every breath, but the clarity was quiet and steady. She realized that this moment, terrifying as it was, could teach her something important about herself. She could learn about her own strength, her ability to endure, and the power of hope in the face of uncertainty. She understood that fear was a part of life, but it did not have to control her. The villagers continued to watch, their eyes filled with a mix of emotions. Some were worried, some hopeful, some unsure. Ahioka could sense their tension, their concern for the outcome of the ritual. She realized that they too were caught in this moment, bound by tradition and the desire to protect their people. She felt a sense of connection to them, even as fear pressed heavily against her. This connection reminded her that she was not entirely alone, that she was part of a community that, despite its flaws, cared for her in its own way. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Ahioka felt the first signs of exhaustion. Her body ached from remaining still, and her mind was heavy with thoughts and memories. She closed her eyes briefly, focusing on her breathing, on the gentle flow of the river, on the sound of the wind in the trees. She reminded herself that life continued, that she had survived difficult moments before, and that she could survive this one as well. She clung to hope like a lifeline, a small but powerful force in the midst of fear, and in that moment, Ahioka made a quiet promise to herself. She would endure this ritual. She would face the fear pressing against her, the weight of tradition and the uncertainty of the future. She would survive, not just for herself but for those who cared for her, for the people she loved, and for the lessons she had learned in the quiet moments of her life. The sand held her tightly. The elders watched with careful attention, and the villagers waited in tense silence. But Ahioka's spirit, quiet yet unbroken, began to grow stronger, ready to face whatever would come next. Ahioka's heart was pounding, faster than she had ever felt before. The sun was high in the sky, and its heat pressed down on her, making the grains of sand burn slightly against her skin. Each breath felt heavy, thick with the tension around her. Her body ached, her shoulders and neck strained from remaining upright, and her legs and arms were trapped beneath the sand. Every small movement caused sharp pressure to dig into her, reminding her of how vulnerable she truly was. Despite this, she refused to scream. She refused to give her fear the power to control her. Around her, the villagers were watching closely. Some shifted nervously, their hands twisting together, their eyes darting between Ioka and the elders. A few of the younger villagers whispered quietly to each other, voices trembling as they expressed their doubts about the ritual.
Is this fair? One whispered.
She hasn't done anything wrong, another replied softly. But their voices were swallowed by the weight of the silence that hung over the riverbank, a silence heavy with centuries of tradition and expectation. The elders continued their work with steady hands and deliberate movements. They circled Ahioka, adjusting the sand, ensuring that the ritual was being performed exactly as it had been done for generations. Each motion reminded Ahioka of the seriousness of the moment. She could feel their authority pressing against her like a weight she could not lift. They believed that the ritual was necessary to appease the spirits and protect the village from misfortune. Ahioka understood their reasoning, but understanding did little to ease the fear curling inside her stomach. Time stretched endlessly. The sun's heat intensified, and Ahioka felt sweat trickling down her temples. She tried to keep her mind calm, focusing on her breathing, counting slowly in her head, and imagining the gentle river flowing beside her. But each passing minute made the fear sharper. Her thoughts turned inward. She thought of her mother, her friends, and the children she had taught. She thought of her village, her home, and the small forest trails she had wandered along as a child. And she realized how much she wanted to live, to feel the cool water of the river again, to hear the laughter of her friends echoing through the trees. Suddenly, a shift occurred. The elder leading the ritual placed his hands on the sand around Ioka's shoulders and began to press more firmly. The sand tightened, and her body felt trapped even more than before. Panic rose in her chest, a sharp burning sensation that made her want to cry out. She forced herself to stay still, remembering the stories of courage she had learned as a child. She remembered the tales of brave women who had faced impossible situations and survived. She whispered a silent prayer to the spirits of her ancestors, asking for strength and protection. As the ritual progressed, Ahioka felt an unexpected fear creeping into her mind, the fear that she might not survive. She tried to push it away, focusing instead on the gentle sounds around her, the flowing river, the rustling trees, the distant calls of birds. These small signs of life reminded her that the world continued beyond this terrifying moment. Yet the sand around her shoulders and neck felt heavier with each passing minute, as though the earth itself was testing her willpower. Her mind began to play tricks on her. She imagined herself sinking further into the sand, unable to breathe, the sun scorching her skin, and the river rising to meet her. She shivered at the thought, but she refused to give in to despair. She thought of her mother's calm voice, of her friends' laughter, and of the story she had grown up hearing. These memories grounded her, reminding her that she was stronger than her fear. She focused on the rhythm of her heartbeat, slow and steady, matching the flow of the river beside her. The elders' voices broke the silence. They spoke in low tones, chanting words Ahioka had heard before, but never truly understood. The language was old, filled with history and meaning, and the rhythm of their chants seemed to echo through the forest. The sound made her feel both small and connected at the same time. She realized that she was part of something much larger, a chain of people and traditions stretching back through generations. Even in fear, she could sense the weight of history around her. Suddenly, one of the younger villagers stepped forward, breaking the tense stillness. A boy no older than 12 approached the edge of the circle, his eyes wide with worry. "Stop!" he shouted, his voice trembling. The elders froze, and a hush fell over the villagers. The boy's words were simple, but they carried the force of innocence and truth. "She hasn't done anything wrong. You're hurting her," his small voice rang out, and for the first time, Ahioka felt a flicker of hope. The elders exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of anger, doubt, and contemplation. Some shook their heads, dismissing the boy's words, but others seemed to hesitate, questioning the ritual in that moment. Ahioka could feel the tension shift slightly. The authority that had seemed absolute began to waver. The sand pressed against her body, but her heart lifted a little. buoyed by the courage of a small child speaking truth. She realized that even in the darkest moments, hope could appear in the most unexpected ways. The boy's words gave others courage. Whispers spread among the villagers, voices rising in quiet objection. "This is too harsh," one said. "She has done nothing wrong," another added. The murmurs grew louder, and the elders could no longer ignore the unease spreading through the crowd. Ahioka's eyes filled with tears, not of despair, but of relief. She understood that she was not entirely alone, that some in the village still saw her innocence, still cared for her life. Yet the ritual was not over. The elders had prepared it carefully, and tradition weighed heavily on them. One elder stepped closer, placing a firm hand on the sand around Ahioka's shoulders. The pressure increased, and she felt panic rising again, stronger than before. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the boy's words, the whispers of villagers, and the rhythm of the river. Each sound reminded her that she had a reason to fight, a reason to endure. She could not give in to fear, not now. Her thoughts turned inward again, reflecting on her own strength. She remembered the long walks through the forest, the moments of solitude when she had felt connected to the earth and the spirits. She remembered learning from her mother, caring for friends, and teaching children the old songs. These memories filled her with quiet determination. She would not let fear control her. She would survive this ritual, no matter how difficult, no matter how terrifying. Hours passed, and the sun began to descend slowly toward the horizon. Shadows grew long, and the heat of the day softened to a warm glow. Ahioka's body ached from remaining still, but her spirit felt stronger than before. She focused on the natural world around her, the rustling of leaves, the distant birds, the gentle flow of the river. Each small detail reminded her that life continued, that she was still a part of it, and that she had the power to endure. The elders continued their ritual, their chants low and rhythmic. Ahioka listened, letting the sound guide her thoughts. She imagined herself walking along the riverbank, feeling the cool water against her skin, hearing the laughter of children, smelling the forest after rain. She held these images tightly, using them to anchor her mind in hope rather than fear. Each chant, each motion of the elders became a challenge she would meet with courage, not despair. As night began to approach, a calm fell over the villagers. The boy who had spoken up earlier remained near the edge, his eyes fixed on Ahioka. Others in the crowd began to nod quietly to each other, as if acknowledging the strength of the young woman buried in the sand. They had seen her resolve, her courage, and her determination to survive, and it inspired something in them. Even the elders seemed to pause, questioning their own actions and the weight of tradition. Ahioka felt the first real sense of control she had experienced since the ritual began. The sand still pressed against her, and her body ached, but her spirit felt unbroken. She had faced fear, she had endured pain, and she had found hope in the courage of others. She realized that survival was not only about strength, but also about connection, the bond she shared with her people, the love she felt for her village, and the courage she discovered within herself. The night approached, casting long shadows across the village. Ahioka closed her eyes, taking slow, steady breaths. She focused on the wind in the trees, the soft flow of the river, and the distant calls of animals preparing for night. These natural sounds reminded her that life continued, that the world was vast and full of possibility, and that she still had a chance to see another day. Despite the fear and uncertainty, she felt a quiet confidence growing. She had faced the worst of the ritual, and she had endured. In that moment, Ahioka understood something profound. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to face fear and continue forward. She understood that survival was not just about her body, but about her spirit, her mind, and her heart. And as the village watched, the elders paused, and the boy remained close. Ahioka felt the first true glimmer of hope. She was alive, she was strong, and she was ready to face whatever would come next. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the tall trees, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. But Ahioka barely noticed the beauty around her. Her body ached, her muscles stiff and sore from hours of being trapped in the sand. The grains pressed into her skin, heavy and relentless, and her neck and shoulders throbbed from the weight. Yet, even in her exhaustion, her mind refused to give in. She took slow, steady breaths, grounding herself with thoughts of the river, the wind in the trees, and the small joys of her past. Around her, the villagers were restless. The murmurs that had begun earlier had grown louder, carried now on a mixture of fear and concern. Some whispered doubts about the ritual, while others questioned whether it was fair to continue. Faces that had once shown only determination now reflected unease, hesitation, and worry. Ioka could sense their changing emotions, and even as her body remained trapped in the sand, her heart lifted slightly. Perhaps there was still a chance. Perhaps someone would intervene before it was too late. It was then that the shaman appeared. He had been away, traveling in the forests to gather herbs and consult with the spirits, but he returned at this critical moment. His presence commanded respect, and the villagers immediately fell silent as he approached. His robes were simple, and his face, though aged, radiated wisdom and calm. He walked slowly to Ahioka, his eyes taking in her position, the weight of the sand, and the expressions of the elders who had overseen the ritual. Ahioka's heart pounded at the sight of him. She had always respected the shaman, not just for his knowledge of the spirits, but for his compassion. He was someone who understood both the traditions of the tribe and the value of human life. As he stepped closer, the elders hesitated. The weight of their authority seemed to waver, and the villagers leaned in, waiting to hear what he would say. Ahioka felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Perhaps, just perhaps, she would survive this ordeal. The shaman knelt beside her, his hands moving carefully over the sand around her shoulders. He examined her closely, noting her breathing, her posture, and the exhaustion evident in her eyes. "Ahioka," he said softly, his voice gentle but commanding, "you have done nothing to anger the spirits. You are strong, and your heart is pure. This ritual is unnecessary." His words were like a balm to her frightened soul, and tears welled in her eyes. She had feared this moment would end in death, but now it seemed there was a chance to live. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Some spoke quietly to one another, debating whether to listen to the shaman or to continue with the ritual as planned. Tradition was powerful, and centuries of customs weighed heavily on their minds, but even as they argued, they could see the concern in the eyes of the villagers. The whispers of doubt had grown, and more people began to question the fairness of the punishment. It was clear that the village itself was at a turning point. The shaman spoke again, his voice rising slightly to carry across the riverbank. "The spirits demand balance, not cruelty. A life should never be taken for something it did not cause. Ahioka has shown courage, patience, and respect. These are the qualities the spirits honor." His words resonated through the crowd, silencing the murmurs for a moment. Ahioka felt her heart lift even higher. The shaman's voice was strong and kind, and it reminded her that she was not alone. She could survive this ritual, and the village could see reason. Slowly, the shaman gestured to the elders, urging them to reconsider their actions. "Do not let fear blind you," he said. "Do not let anger or old habits dictate the fate of the innocent. Release her, and the spirits will be pleased with your wisdom." The elders looked at one another, some with reluctance, some with fear of breaking tradition, and some with a quiet hope. After a long pause, the elder who had led the ritual nodded slowly. Perhaps we have been too rigid," he admitted. "The shaman speaks truth. We must consider mercy." At that moment, the villagers began to murmur words of encouragement. Children who had been watching from the edges whispered softly to each other, while adults nodded in agreement, their expressions softening. The tension that had gripped the riverbank for hours began to ease slightly. Ahioka could feel it in the air, the shift in energy, the sense that the ritual was no longer absolute, and that her life was no longer entirely in the hands of the sand and the elders. With the shaman's guidance, the elders began to work together to release her. Slowly, carefully, They dug away the sand that held her trapped. Each handful that was removed brought relief to Ahioka's body. The pressure eased from her shoulders, and she could feel her muscles relaxing, even as exhaustion remained. Her heart pounded not with fear now, but with a cautious hope, a growing realization that she would survive this ordeal. As the sand was cleared from around her, Ahioka blinked against the sunlight, seeing the faces of her people. The villagers watched in silence, some with tears in their eyes, others with looks of respect and newfound understanding. The shaman's presence had shifted the energy of the entire gathering. Where there had been fear and judgment, there was now compassion and relief. Ahioka took a deep breath, savoring the freedom of movement, the gentle warmth of the sun on her skin, and the knowledge that she had survived a trial that had seemed impossible. She rose slowly to her feet, her legs weak from being trapped for so long, but her spirit unbroken. The shaman placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are strong, Ahioka," he said. "You have faced fear and pain, and you have endured. The spirits honor your courage." His words filled her with a sense of pride and belonging. She had faced the ritual not as a victim, but as a survivor, and the experience had strengthened her in ways she could not yet fully understand. The elders stepped forward, bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Some murmured apologies, others offered quiet words of encouragement. They had witnessed Ahioka's courage and the compassion of the shaman, and they understood that tradition must sometimes be tempered with wisdom and mercy. The villagers began to speak more freely, sharing their relief and their admiration for Ahioka's endurance. Even the children approached cautiously, their eyes wide with awe, as if they were seeing a hero before them. Ahioka's mother rushed forward, embracing her daughter tightly. "I feared I would lose you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ahioka hugged her back, tears flowing freely now, but these were tears of relief and gratitude, not fear. She had survived, and she was surrounded by the people who loved her, the village that had watched her endure, and the shaman whose wisdom had guided them all. The shaman raised his hands, calling for a moment of silence. "Let this day be remembered," he said, "not as a day of punishment, but as a lesson in courage, mercy, and the power of life. Ahioka has shown us all that fear can be faced, that tradition can be questioned, and that compassion is the greatest gift we can offer one another." The villagers nodded, understanding the depth of his words. They felt a sense of unity and relief, knowing that balance had been restored not through fear, but through courage and wisdom. As evening fell, Ahioka walked slowly toward the river, feeling the cool breeze on her face and the soft earth beneath her feet. She paused to touch the water, letting it flow through her fingers, a reminder that life continued, that she was still part of this world, and that she had a future to look forward to. The village had witnessed her strength, the shaman had guided them with wisdom, and the lesson of compassion had been written into their hearts. Ahioka understood that this moment would be remembered for generations, not as a story of punishment, but as a story of hope, courage, and survival. That night, as the stars appeared in the sky, Ahioka sat quietly by the river, reflecting on everything that had happened. She had faced fear, pain, and the weight of tradition, but she had endured. She had discovered a strength within herself she had never fully realized, and she had seen the power of compassion, mercy, and courage in action. The village slept peacefully, the river flowed gently, and the wind whispered through the trees. Ahioka closed her eyes, feeling a deep sense of peace. She had survived the ritual, and she was ready to embrace the life that lay ahead. She stood on a small hill at sunrise, watching light move slowly across the land. The air was cool, and the world felt quiet and wide. For a long time, she had feared mornings. They once reminded her of pain and endings. Now, they felt like beginnings. She breathed in deeply and felt her chest rise without fear. She was alive, and that truth still surprised her. Life after survival was not easy, but it was real. Each day asked something from her, and each day she gave what she could. She learned how to live in a place that was not her home. The land looked different. The people spoke in ways she did not know before. At first, she stayed silent. She watched more than she spoke. Silence felt safe. It gave her space to heal. Her body slowly grew strong again. Her skin healed under the sun. Her hands learned new work. She helped gather food, clean tools, and care for the young. Simple tasks brought her peace. They gave her reason to wake up each day. At night, she slept better than before. Dreams still came, but they did not control her anymore. When she woke, she reminded herself that the ground was firm beneath her feet. She often thought about the life she lost. Her tribe was part of her blood, her memory, her first breath. She did not hate them, even though they had turned away. Hate felt too heavy to carry. Instead, she felt sadness. Sadness was lighter. It allowed space for understanding. She knew fear and tradition ruled many choices. That did not make them right, but it made them human. The stranger who saved her never asked for thanks. He treated her with respect, not pity. Over time, they spoke more. He listened when she talked about her past. He never pushed her to explain. His patience helped her trust again. Through him, she learned that kindness could exist without rules or judgment. That lesson stayed with her. As months turned into years, her voice grew stronger. She began to speak up, to share ideas, to help others who struggled. People started listening, not because of her past, but because of her calm strength. She did not need to explain where she came from. Her actions spoke for her. She worked hard, stayed honest, and cared deeply. There were days when pain returned without warning. A smell, a sound, or a memory could stop her breath for a moment. When that happened, she did not run. She stood still and reminded herself that she survived. She placed her hand over her heart and felt it beat. That steady rhythm became her anchor. It told her she belonged to this world. She never forgot the sand or the silence, but she refused to let those moments define her future. Instead, she used them as proof of her strength. If she could live through that, she could face anything. This belief shaped her choices. She helped people who were ignored. She spoke for those who had no voice. She knew what it felt like to be left behind. One evening she sat by a fire and watched sparks rise into the dark sky. A child sat beside her and asked about courage. She smiled softly and said courage was not loud. It did not shout or fight. Courage was quiet. It stayed when everything else tried to leave. The child listened closely, and she felt something warm inside her chest. She understood then that her story was not about punishment or rescue. It was about choice. She chose to live when life seemed finished. She chose to forgive when anger would have been easier. She chose peace over bitterness. These choices built her new life, piece by piece. She never returned to a tribe, but she carried their lessons forward. She kept the good and released the pain. In doing so, she honored herself. She learned that belonging did not require permission. It came from within. She belonged to the earth beneath her feet and the sky above her head. As the fire faded, she looked toward the horizon. Tomorrow would come, just like today did, and she would meet it with open eyes. Not because she forgot the past, but because she no longer feared it. Her life was her own now, and she intended to live it fully, one honest breath at a time.